Safer Sanctuaries, Nurturing Trust Within Faith Communities is a new and comprehensive resource that continues the tradition of Safe Sanctuaries ministry by building on its trusted policies and procedures. To learn more, go to safersanctuaries.org or call 800 972 0433.
Hey, this is Dan Wunderlich, and last month on the MyCom Church Marketing Podcast, we began a conversation with Brady Shearer of Pro Church Tools about the new era that's dawning in social media. And it is an era, Brady says, in which churches finally have an advantage. And if you haven't had a chance to check out that part of the conversation, I would encourage you to go and listen to that first as we lay the groundwork for today, which is when we dive into the specific post format and strategy you can use that just might help you reach more people online than ever before. As always, thank you so much for listening. And here's part 2 of my conversation with Brady Shearer of Pro Church Tools. All right, let's get to what everyone's been waiting for. Brady, tell us the sort of the 30,000 foot view of the one-page church social media plan and where folks can go to grab the PDF when we're done with this conversation.
Yeah, so we have an entire workshop dedicated to this. It's available at churchsocialmediaplan.com and it's free. It just needs your email address. 3 different videos in the workshop. So if at any point something sounds confusing or it's like, oh, I wish they would talk more about that in depth, it is almost certainly in the workshop.
Yeah.
And the downloadable template, the one-page church social media plan, is also in that workshop. But the very simple idea behind the one-page church social media plan is that you have recorded videos of your church's sermons. Most churches now do. Let's call it a fortunate byproduct of this pandemic.
Yeah, absolutely.
What that means is that you are sitting on a gold mine of content that can be repurposed for social media. And this is important because for the most part, when we get in front of a blank cursor or a blank canvas for social media, we are just doing that. It's like, okay, I got to come up with something to do on social. Now that we have recorded videos and every platform is incentivizing the same content format, we can just take these videos that we already have, videos that already have our senior leaders in them, videos that already are the majority, the central focus of what we do in person. So that means what we're doing offline will be congruent with what we're doing online when we repurpose these videos for social. The catchy name with some nice alliteration, because we serve churches, that we came up with is social sermons.
Yeah.
Social sermons. And there's a lot that goes into doing this well, because what you can't just do is extract a certain 60-second portion and just put that on social media and expect it to do well. And so do you want to get into that, Dan?
Well, yeah, I mean, let's just start by also, we're not also trying to create a 90-second summary of the entire message. And so I guess when particularly if you're not the pastor, although even if you are, there's a lot of folks in our audience who are the pastors and are also doing this work. When you're listening back, or maybe even listening in the sanctuary or on the stream and taking notes, what kind of things are you listening for in the sermon that can then become potentially effective online?
Sure. Well, and that's a good point. What we're not trying to do is create a recap of the sermon. What we're trying to do is extract segments within the sermon that can basically become their own mini messages and stand alone. What we don't want for social media is there to be context required for the video to be consumed.
Yeah.
If context is required, you're never going to get wide distribution. So let's use practical examples here that come from real churches that have done well. So I got a DM from a church this week, and this is probably the most I've seen one of these pop off, but one of their social sermons had 1 million views. And the video itself was 60 seconds long, and it was from, actually, interestingly, their Christmas service. And that's important because, again, we're not trying to create recaps of messages.
Right.
What that means is that this content is evergreen. So I watched this social sermon for the first time this week, And it was just as relevant to me this week as it would have been when it was first preached in a Christmas service in December
Yeah.
3 months ago. And evergreen is an online marketing content term that we use, which basically means, hey, there's no expiration date on this piece of content. And that's what makes social sermons so valuable, because when one does pop off and get wide distribution on these platforms, people are going to be seeing it weeks after it was first preached. So we need it to be absent any need for context. And we also need it to not be a recap of the sermon that maybe feels like, oh, this was really timely and now it's not as relevant. So this specific social sermon that popped off for this church was a pastor telling a story about the car manufacturer Mercedes. And the story was how Mercedes in the 50s developed the technology for the airbag in automobiles. And rather than keeping this technology for themselves, what they did was they freely distributed it to all the other auto manufacturers, for the reason they said, hey, this is going to save lives. And so we don't want to keep it for ourselves. We need everyone to have this. And so at the end of this social sermon, the pastor draws a line between that and faith in Jesus and says, hey, we have this amazing thing, faith in Christ, the good news. We don't want to keep it for ourselves. This is why we feel so compelled to share it with the world. And that was probably, a smaller moment within the message, but that makes a perfect standalone mini message. I got another one here. I'm looking at, this was a DM that came in today, and the title of this social sermon was, do you struggle with anxiety? Try this morning routine. And this is a smaller church. It reached 246 of this church's own followers. They have a few hundred followers on Instagram, and it reached 11,128 non-followers.
Yeah.
So just consider that ratio for a second. This is what discovery algorithms can do. You publish, you reach your, couple hundred churches, a couple hundred people that follow your church on Instagram, and then you reach 10,000 plus people that don't follow your church on Instagram. When in social media history was that even doable?
Yeah,
right?
seriously.
And I have, because I started posting these as testimonies on my stories on Instagram this week. And so people just started sending in more. Like, I'm looking at one, this was from a German church, 1.8 million views. Then another German church DM'd me. Apparently all the German churches are following. They reached 615,000 non-followers.
Wow.
And 500 followers. So their church has 700 followers. They reached 551 of them, 615,000 non-followers. Their followers doubled on this one reel. They went from 700 to 1,300 followers from this one reel. I could go on and on sharing stories, but the key that makes these work is something that we call the hook. Mm-hmm. And you heard me read one out loud there. Like, feeling anxious? Try this morning routine. What a hook does is it contextualizes the segment that you've extracted from the message to make it universally accessible. And a good hook, we always say, it lies at the intersection of faith and culture. You want something that is aligned with the mission of your church. Right. And of course, because we're using the source material of your existing sermon, we're not coming up with something that you're like, oh, this has nothing to do with my church. So it needs to make sense for you, but it also needs to make sense to as many people that come across it on social. It needs to be universally accessible. And so, feeling anxious, try this morning routine. Okay, anxiety. Yes, that is something that is universally a problem for all people in some degree. And then try this morning routine. Okay, here's a practical way that we can solve this. And I just got a screenshot of that social sermon, so I didn't watch it. But assuredly, in there's something about prayer. There is something about silence. There's something about perhaps reading scripture, meditating on the promises of God, whatever it might be. That's there. So that's how you get the intersection of faith and culture. You start people with the hook, meet them where they are, and then the social sermon is going to lead them where you want to take them, which is, towards Christ.
And I'll tell you that even just these last couple months since you've introduced this, it has started to shape a little bit how I write my sermons. And so I begin to start to almost pre-engineer a hook rather than relying on, dumping off, reverse engineering a hook on, one of my staff members after, based on whatever just happens to have come out of my mouth. And so what's been helpful to me is you develop sort of this rating system in 3 different categories. And so can you tell us about the 3 C's of great hooks?
Yeah, so when we launched Social Sermons, we had to hire 16 new people to work with the 100 churches that signed up. And We only had 100 spots available because we only had hired 16 people.
Yeah.
And so as I'm teaching the process to the copywriters that we hired, I came up with this exercise, and it's called the 3 C's of writing a hook. And the 3 C's are cliffhanger, common, and care. So cliffhanger, common, and care. And what the exercise instructs you to do is to write your hook and then give it a score out of 5 for each of those 3 C's.
Yeah.
Total score out of 15. If your final score, when you add up all 3 of those elements, is less than 10, scrap it, try again. We want to be higher than 10. And so cliffhanger, that's the mystery. So feeling anxious, try this morning routine. Oh, okay, great. Well, yeah, what is the routine? I want to know. If that can help with the anxiety that I'm dealing with, I'd love to know. So cliffhanger, that's like a 4 out of 5 for me, just reading that for the first time. Common, yes, anxiety. That is something that is common, very common. So 5 out of 5 there. And then care. Does someone going throughout their day stumble across this and be like, yeah, I wish I had less anxiety? Yes, anxiety is a problem that people deal with from the moment they wake up to the moment they go to bed, or every evening, or every week, whatever it might be. Yes, that is absolutely something that people are going to care about when they see it. Let's talk about a bad example. So we had one person write us a hook while we were doing practice and instruction, and they wrote it as like, how you can practice gratitude. And what I said to them was, I was like, look, gratitude is an excellent place as a destination of where we want to take people. But we can't use that as the starting point, because it's not something that people care about. People wake up in the morning, and very few of us are thinking, how can I practice more gratitude today? We just don't have the luxury for something like that. Yes, that might be the solution to maybe something that we're dealing with, but we're focused more on the problem. We're focused more on, oh yeah, I got to get to work. I'm late. I should have eaten better yesterday. I haven't gotten as much movement in as I want. The bills are due. Family stress, work stress, whatever it might be. There's so much to consider. And so that's another important consideration. Where you start with people can and should probably be different from where you want to take them. But those are the 3 C's. Great exercise. Any one of us can get better at this.
Yeah.
You just got to keep working the exercise. Okay. And then after you've done it for a while, become more of a hard grader on yourself. What used to be a 3 out of 5, that's a 2 out of 5 now. And then that's how you keep getting better.
Well, and this is maybe even another example of the shift. Like, I mean, that's not a perfect prompt, but that's not a bad title for YouTube, right? People have taught for years to think of YouTube as a search, as a search engine, and so a lot of YouTube videos are how to do something, or how to practice, or how to study, or what version of the Bible should I choose, and those have been really effective video titles for people who know what they're looking for. But that is different than someone scrolling a discovery algorithm. Maybe that's a really clear way to delineate them in our mind. Maybe. What do you think?
Yeah, I think a lot of these techniques are pretty universal, right? Like, we're not coming up with something new. At the end of the day, storytelling is storytelling.
And we talk a lot on this podcast about balancing things like using emotion, because it can be a powerful motivator, but also not straying into manipulation. And so when we're looking for hooks, when we're writing hooks, we might be tempted to crank it up to 11 or 16 in this case. And you almost end up with like a clickbait like hook. And not only might that stray into manipulation, but how important is it? I mean, I know the answer to this, but I'd love for you to talk about it. How important is it that the actual sermon clip follows up and delivers on the promise that's made in the hook?
Yeah, so we say that there are 3 elements to a good social sermon. There's the tease, there's the hook, and there's the resolution. And what you're describing there is the resolution at the end. You can't queue up this really sensational and like high stakes hook and then not have the pastor follow through with a resolution on that.
Yeah.
And that's why the editing of these sermons into social sermons becomes important, because you only have 60 seconds to work with. And the reason is because as of right now, 60 seconds is the shortest amount of time on these platforms. So Facebook is still, and YouTube, 60 seconds max. Instagram's 90 seconds. TikTok's like, hey, you can publish an hour on TikTok at this
Yeah,
point.
you can. Yeah.
But because we only want to make one piece of content, it needs to be 60 seconds or under so that it can work on all platforms. So you don't have that much time. So you need to edit something where you do provide an answer, because you make a promise at the beginning. And if you don't follow through on that promise, well, then that's how you break trust with people. You're never going to build momentum on social if you're like making these big claims and then you don't follow through. And we've all had that experience. Maybe it's on YouTube, maybe it's on social, where people say, oh, we're going to do this thing. And then you realize, oh, that was not a good representation of this actual video. They kind of swerved in a different direction, or they made this promise and then they were like, oh, find it in part 2. And I'm like, okay, I'm just done. Keep swiping. Or they made a promise and they just don't ever really get to it in a satisfactory way by the end of the video.
Yeah.
And then it comes
the like and follow for part 2. It's always like, well, I don't know that I'm that invested.
Yeah. And also, like, you didn't need to do this. You have like 12 minutes of time on TikTok. So like not necessary. And yeah, I mean, we can get into the nitty gritty of that, but we also all have like a different taste for what we consider too clickbaity or too, I don't like the word clickbaity because I think it's become redefined, but too sensational or too dry. And so like, I'm just going to read out to you. These are 3 hooks that I wrote that I am totally fine with. I think they're very compelling, but to me, they don't become too sensational. So, and then you can ask yourself as you're listening, do I think that's too sensational? And is that too far for me? And if it is, what about it is too far? So in order, number 1, 2 words that parents struggle to say, but need to say anyway. And this was actually a rewrite I did where one of the employees that we were training wrote it. Why is it so hard to say I'm sorry to our kids? And I said to them, I was like, what you've done is you've eliminated the cliffhanger element of this hook.
Yeah.
Because you've already said like the thing that the message. You've already said it's I'm sorry.
Yeah.
And the thing is, if you're going throughout your day, I don't really care why it's hard for parents to say I'm sorry to our kids. Like, I'm a parent and I have been a child to a parent. I don't really care why it's difficult. I just like to know, like, what is it that I should be saying, or what was it that was supposed to be said to me that didn't? And that's why when you frame it, 2 words that parents struggle to say but need to say anyway, that's compelling, and it's the identical social sermon. We're just presenting it in a different way. So that's number 1. Number 2, want stronger relationships? Say this to the people you care about. Number 3, do you have a dysfunctional family? Here's some good news. Number 4, the meaning of life according to the Bible. Number 5, a guide for healthy masculinity. Number 6, what your bank statement says about you. So those are 6 to me that I'm like, okay, they really strike a good balance between those 3 C's: cliffhanger, common, and care. And we're not pushing the limit so far that this social sermon will not follow through and answer those things. Every one of those things, we can cut together this sermon video into a 60-second clip that does have a resolution.
And I'm on board with all of those. So that's cool. I like that. I'm riding in that same lane.
And now let's take a brief pause to hear a word from our sponsor. Safer Sanctuaries. Nurturing trust within faith communities is a new and comprehensive resource that continues the tradition of Safe Sanctuaries ministry by building on the trusted policies and procedures that have guided churches over the past 25 years. This resource contains theological grounding for the work of abuse prevention, psychological insights about abuse and abuse prevention, basic guidelines for risk reduction, age-level specific guidance, and step-by-step instructions on how to develop, revise, update, and implement an abuse prevention plan in your church or organization. For Christians, resisting evil and doing justice are ways that we live and serve Jesus Christ. Safer Sanctuaries provides help to do just that by framing this work as a life-giving, community-enhancing, and proactive endeavor. It enables communities to be empowered and flourish as they develop and implement policies and procedures that make everyone safer. To learn more, go to safersanctuaries.org or call 800-972-0433. And now, back to our program.
Well, now you mentioned editing. Let's jump into editing, and maybe just on the technical side of things. Obviously, well, I guess maybe let me ask first, is there any value to, if you recognize there's a section of your sermon that resonated and went well, but you could maybe say it a little tighter, if you have the camera and you have the time, is there any value to just reshooting a part of your sermon, like retelling a story that resonated well? I know, part of the the idea here is we're already recording our sermons, so we only have to edit them. But have you noticed any difference between a straight to camera delivery versus clipped from talking to an auditorium?
Yeah, I would not recommend that in almost every case. I mean, a big part of what makes these social sermons do well is because they feel authentic. You
Mm,
feel like you're sitting in on something that was happening and wasn't rehearsed in that way.
mm,
Whereas if you redo it again, if you talk to the camera, it can come off very rehearsed, it can come off contrived, and that is something that all of us are evaluating every video
yeah,
by.
yeah.
Does this feel too polished? And polished not in the sense of like, is the production quality high? That can matter, but in this instance we're talking about, does this feel prepared? and
Yeah.
and and of course that's ironic, because of course the sermon is prepared.
Right.
That might have been the third time this pastor's preached it this morning. If you have multiple services,
Yeah.
if you have one service, certainly they preached it many times in the week in preparation to themselves, and out loud perhaps while practicing. It is prepared, it is contrived, it is polished. That's not the first draft, but there's something to you sitting in, as that is being shared with real people, versus you feel like, oh, I'm just an audience of one and they're like talking directly to me. And so if it's raw, that's okay. Like, we like to cut things up pretty aggressively. We remove silences, we remove gaps. Just stylistically, that is kind of the way vertical videos are
Yeah.
received. And so I think sometimes churches can be taken a little bit aback by that. We're like, oh, this is like pretty choppy. Can we make it a bit more smooth? And I'm like, well, you'll probably sacrifice effectiveness if you do that. And I always say, mission over method.
Yeah.
And so if you have this preference on how the video is done, I understand why you might have that preference. My argument would be, you're going to reach fewer people that way. So to me, we got to put that preference aside to do what is right. But again, we all have different levels of comfort on this. Like,
Yeah.
there
True.
are certain caption styles. There's a very popular vertical video caption style that I would never want a church to do, because I just feel like it's just a bit much. And there is like a certain aura that I think our churches would want to present online.
Yeah.
And so we all, and that's not a binary, or that's not a rule for me. That's just like my own feeling. Oh yeah, there's all lines where like, that feels a bit too much. And I do it for my own content as well. And we're seeing something online where, let's go back to YouTube, as another parallel. YouTube thumbnails, like, how sensational can they be?
Yeah.
How much high contrast, how much color, how many ways can we contort our faces to get attention and get the click? Well, now we're starting to see people be like, well, they cannot become any more sensational. They literally cannot. Like, the videos that do best on YouTube now are like, I took garlic bread and I flew it to the moon. So I don't know how you can, like, that's a real video, Dan. I don't know how you could get more sensational than that. And that video is it's a very good video. But the way that it's presented is like, I got to click on that. Why is there garlic bread in the moon? We can't go any farther than that. So now what we're seeing is like the swing back towards the other side, which is like, okay, we're going to dial down the contrast. No text or very little text. We're going to bring down the color. It's going to look more human. And so a lot of this is just, figuring out what the style is at the time and going with it.
Well, I think it is vitally important that we pay attention to what format will actually make it show up as a reel or a short, because, and we have done this ourselves. We have, at my church, we have either had a video be a little bit too long, or it wasn't maybe the right shape, and so it gets uploaded as just a regular video. And the algorithms are specifically designed right now and tuned right now to pump reels and shorts in these specific formats. And so we need to be taking our services, which are most likely filmed in widescreen, and editing them to vertical videos. And a high percentage of people are going to be encountering the videos with the sound off. And so captions are a must. There are a lot of apps, there are a lot of software, programs out there that can do these things, from very, very expensive all the way down to free. What are some of the ones that either you use or that you recommend to churches that are maybe not as tech savvy?
Sure. I mean, the most popular mobile editor is CapCut, and you can download that on your phone, and you can do it all right there from your mobile device. If you're looking for something that you can use not just on your phone, we would recommend DaVinci Resolve, which is a free video editor. It's the one that we use. They do have a studio version, which you can pay for. It's kind of a one-time payment for the license. And it has like a lot of really high-end video editing tools in that, so you would not need them for this context or maybe any context. Uh,
Yeah.
so that's a great one. The free version is a lot of free versions are like, oh, this is like a really limited free version. That's not the case for this software.
Right. Yeah.
It's fully functional, the free version as it is. Oh, I need an 8K composition. Okay, well then buy the $1,000 license, and that's a lifetime license and stuff. But for most of us, unnecessary. So love that. I mean, of course, if you have access to a Creative Cloud subscription by Adobe, right? Oh, maybe my church has the Creative Cloud subscription because we use Photoshop and we use Lightroom and we use Audition. Oh, great. I also have Premiere where I can do editing in there. Great. Use what you have. Premiere will be great also. So those are a few options.
Are there any things that churches should be paying attention to as they're filming that might make editing easier? Whether it's the framing or making sure that there's room for captions. Obviously, good sound quality is a must. Any tips there?
Yeah, I mean, framing, if your pastor is like walking off the stage, or pardon me, out of the frame, that can be difficult. Premiere has this really cool auto reframe tool now where, let's say you drop a horizontal timeline onto, or a horizontal video onto the timeline in Premiere, you can use the auto reframe sequence to turn it into a vertical timeline
Mm,
where Premiere will, like, in seconds, just naturally track your pastor across this and keep them in the center of the frame so you don't have to do it. It's not always perfect. You might have to adjust it. Sometimes I've found that Premiere can get tricked by pulpits and by especially televisions or screens on
yeah.
stage. So if you're preaching like from a screen and you have like that, it can trick it. So sometimes you have to work around it, but that's great for like making a quick version of what you need. The biggest culprit, though, is the on-screen overlays and graphics.
Mm,
You really want a clean feed because I can reframe a pastor into the center of a vertical video. But those overlays of a lower third or a
yeah.
full screen overlay, there's no way to reframe that. You just have to like put B-roll over it basically to hide it. And so the clean feed is really important. But aside from that, like no, like it's pretty easy to work with most of this stuff. And the great thing is you don't need crazy video quality either.
Right. Yeah.
That's typically what churches think of first. Like, I only have one camera angle, and like it's not even like 4K, and like, oh, it's not even 1080. Like it's not even that great. It's like, okay, but most content is shot on phones nowadays anyway. And what's great is like, yes, you're like not shooting in the highest resolution. Well, phones are tiny,
Yeah.
so once you shrink down that video onto a phone, it doesn't look like it's bad resolution. And most stuff is already crazy compressed by the time it gets to phones anyway. And so you really can get by with a very minimal setup, which is great.
Absolutely. And then the last practical thing is ending with a call to action so that hopefully your connection doesn't end after 90 seconds. And in this 60 seconds, 90-second window, you might not have the ability to do the, stereotypical YouTuber like verbal request for a follow or anything like that. But what are your recommendations for inviting people to connect or follow or take a next step after listening to this clip?
Yeah, so we talk about something called the next steps ladder, which is with every piece of content that you do, you always want to be inviting people to a deeper level of connection. And the reality is, the minority of people will actually take that invitation, but you need to keep making the invitation. And so what we do is we usually just put a 3-second screen at the end of the videos. It's over top as the pastor is still like finishing their final, you know, thought within the social sermon, and we'll just invite people to listen to the full message either on podcast or on YouTube. And going back to that example of that social sermon that got 1 million views and the Mercedes story, that church didn't use a call to action screen at the end. And when
Mm.
I went to that reel, I saw the first comment, and it was the most upvoted comment, which is, where can I find this full story?
Oh, wow.
And I was just thinking, I was like, because that's the question. Okay, great, Brady. We got 100,000 views. We got 1 million views. Well, now what? Well, you've invited people to greater levels of invitation. And then when they're listening to the full sermon on podcast or on YouTube, presumably there's a moment in there where you say, hey, fill out the Connect card or subscribe to the podcast or reach out to a pastor for prayer or for spiritual care in some way. Great. So we continue down the next steps ladder. But what's regrettable is when you do have a sermon that pops off
Mm.
and then there isn't that call to action screen at the end. People still know to follow. People
Yeah.
still know to
Yeah.
do those things naturally. So it's not like it's all is lost, but we like to make those explicit asks. Again, going back to YouTube, like it's really frustrating. But the difference between when you say like this video and people doing what you say and then just hoping they'll like it because obviously that's important is
Yeah.
night and day. So making those invitations be express and obvious is important. So that's how we do it.
There you go. There's somebody I've been seeing videos from lately who at the beginning says like this video, and then if it's not helpful, you can unlike it at the end. And I was like, no one's gonna remember to do that, but that's a really clever way.
That's great.
All right, the last thing I want to ask you a question I ask all of our guests, and that is, what words of encouragement do you have for the people who are faithfully day in and day out doing this work of church communications?
Well, I think what's really helped me over time is I have like a little Evernote file of any time someone has like encouraged me, I've like clipped it and I just store it there. And that's not a piece of encouragement from me specifically,
Yeah.
but I can't tell you how many times over the years when like I've just been having a down day or a down week or a down month, and I revisit that just to remind me like, hey, I am capable. I am skilled and I belong here. And the first one I remember, and after I haven't looked at it a while now that I say it, because like, eventually you start to like actually believe the things that you read and you don't need to be reminded of them.
Yeah.
But I remember the first one I ever got was I was new to the space, and my friend Jeff at Church Motion Graphics, who is also a Canadian, he reached out to me and he's like, "Hey, love your blogs. Like you really fit in here." And I was like, "Oh my gosh, like I'm a 21-year-old kid." And he says I fit in, like Jeff would know. He's like the OG.
Yeah.
And so I wrote that down. And then this week I woke up to one, and it was I won't say who it's from, but it was from this like pastor that I looked up to like my whole life from when I was a kid. And he was like, "Hey, your stuff is great. Thank you for encouraging us as churches."
Hmm.
And he had followed me, and I was like, "Wow!" And like, so saving those moments, whether they're big or small, and having them as like this archive, because when you do need it, then it's always there for you. And then just for me, my encouragement is nobody knows what we're doing.
Yeah.
Like, I've done this for 10 years. I've done it for all the churches. I do it for myself. I lead a successful company. Every day, I'm like, what is this algorithm doing? Like, the key is the doing the right approach, right?
Yeah.
Like, just think about it as baseball. The best baseball players fail 2 out of every 3 times. What other industry is like that? Well, maybe social media is like
sure.
that. Just keep doing the right thing, follow the best practices, find a sustainable rhythm for you. The worst thing that you can do is like go really hard right out of the gate, and then you can't keep
Yes.
that pace up, right? Sustainable pace. The only way to make a difference and build momentum and get traction on social is to be active for a very long time. That's how you make a difference. This church that got 1 million views is great, right? Except they reached out to me and said, why haven't our other videos popped off? We haven't had one. And I looked at them and I said, well, you haven't even tried another one that was based on story. The one that did so well for you, like try that framework again. It's not guaranteed, but at least follow the best practices. But even that church who we're using as our quote unquote like successful example, one video doesn't do that much.
Yes.
It can. I mean, that one church did double their following. So sometimes, but then you have to keep earning that trust and earning that attention over and over again. It's like working out. I mean, I'm just analogies, only analogies, Dan. That's all I do apparently. One great workout, no transformation. 2 great workouts, no transformation. 1 year of consistent good workouts sometimes, great workouts sometimes, maybe a lot of bad workouts, but you kept doing it for a year. Transformation.
Absolutely.
It's the same thing with social. Sustainability.
Well, Brady, thank you so much for your time and sharing so much of your experience and wisdom today. If folks want to follow your work, if they want to learn more about Pro Church Tools, all that Nucleus has to offer, or if they just want to reach out and say hi or ask a question, what's the best way to do that?
Yeah, I mean, everything we've talked about today is in that workshop, churchsocialmediaplan.com. Just put your email in. It's all there. Download the PDF. We go through it and we fill it all out together in that workshop.
Yeah.
That's the first thing. Second thing, if you want to check out Nucleus, nucleus.church, Dan mentioned using the launcher. That's a free website plugin that we
Yes.
created that works for every single church website. It's free forever. It's not like DaVinci Resolve, that video editor that I mentioned, that even that, which is free, has like a paid version, and it's just free forever. Any church website. So you can use that piece of software and learn all about it. And then if you want to connect with me, you can search my name on YouTube, on Instagram, on TikTok, on Facebook, the podcast, Pro Church Tools. We're creating free content every single week. So we're here to support you along the journey of, managing this biggest communication shift in 500 years. We're there with you.
Awesome. Well, Brady, thank you again. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Dan.
And now, listeners, we want to hear from you. What makes an effective hook when you're scrolling social media? And if you give this approach a try, let us know how it goes. Email us at podcast@umcom.org, and we just might share your thoughts or stories on a future episode. And you can, of course, use that email, podcast@umcom.org, to send us any feedback or topic suggestions you have for the show. We always love hearing from you. And as always, the easiest way to support the show and to help other church communicators like yourself find it is by sharing this episode with your friends and colleagues, or by leaving a review on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you're listening to us right now. And did you know that United Methodist Communications has celebrated over 80 years of ministry? Your support ensures that the latest denominational news, dynamic stories, and informative articles will continue to connect our global community. Make a tax-deductible donation today at resourceumc.org/giveumcom. Thanks again for listening to the MyCom Church Marketing Podcast.
Safer Sanctuaries, Nurturing Trust Within Faith Communities, is a new and comprehensive resource that continues the tradition of Safe Sanctuaries ministry by building on its trusted policies and procedures. This resource contains theological grounding for the work of abuse prevention, basic guidelines for risk reduction, age-level specific guidance, and step-by-step instructions on how to develop, revise, update, and implement an abuse prevention plan.